Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leadership Development Office radio show and podcast. We're calling this the Leadership in Practice radio show because we're going to tap into our colleagues' experience with leadership. I am your host, Matthew Painter. I'm the Director of Leadership Development, and I am joined today by my very capable colleague and co-host, Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Hyder, and I am a Senior Consultant for Leadership Development in the Leadership Development Office. And we are extremely fortunate to be joined by Patricia Pritchett today. And we'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Well, my name is Patricia Pritchett, and I am the Senior Vice President for Ambulatory Services for UAB Medicine. I have had a number of great careers. I was careers a nurse, careers an attorney, certainly my executive role now in operations. And so all of these things have been great building blocks for me as a leader.
Sounds like you've got some amazing experience, Patricia, which is kind of why you're in your role. And we've had the pleasure of working with you a little bit. Today's topic is around relationship management, specifically around feedback and conflict and so forth. And before I get directly into that topic, I'm just curious if you have any leadership words of wisdom or leadership lessons that you'd like to offer to our listeners.
Yeah, my leadership recommendations come from the School of Hard Knocks. So, these are things you learn, and then you hopefully build on those learnings as you grow as a leader. And I think the first one for me is really making sure as a leader that I have my own personal advisory board. I have 3 colleagues whom I've worked with for many years now that I really trust. We sort of have our Las Vegas rules concepts because we need to bounce things off of one another. We need to be able to push back when pushback is appropriate or to help strategize. So as a leader, I always have people who care about your career and are looking out for your best interest, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with you on everything. Self-awareness, I think that's important. So I've learned, what am I doing or what am I not doing to contribute to my success? I've worked with leaders before who felt that because they got a certain degree, that made them eligible for a leadership role. But you got to remember that people are watching what you do. And so, you really need to understand, am I volunteering? Am I participating on committees? Am I doing extra things to really help myself shine as a leader? Third, I would say, keep in mind that a failure is just that. It's one failure. And so anytime you fail at something or you don't feel like you were at your best, just regroup and move forward and learn from that failure. That does not, just because you have a failure doesn't mean that people don't believe in you. They just might not agree with you on something that you're working on. And then I think the last thing I would say is to always approach everyone and everything with some level of compassion and empathy. No matter what I have going on, I still need to be able to treat others with respect. And so I think that's just a value that I have as a leader. So I think those are probably some of my key leadership lessons.
Patricia, we could end right there. You already given us such good nuggets of wisdom. So thank you for that. So today's topic, as I mentioned, is around relationship management. So what does that even mean to you in terms of being an organizational leader?
I think for me, what that means is that how I conduct myself, how I approach my team, how I approach my peers. I've got to remember that I want to lead by example, and so I always want to make sure that like I said earlier, I treat people with respect. That I do, listen to them, get their feedback. If I'm going to make a decision that's perhaps different than what my colleague or my teammate might have made, that they know the why behind that. So I really think it's about transparency as much as anything.
Great.
So what has been the biggest challenge for you in being transparent? Was that something that you naturally were inclined to do because of your personality, or is this something that you had to make a decision to do over time?
I think I am a transparent person, but that is something I actually learned. And I actually learned it from an attorney that I worked with several years ago. he and I were involved. He was defending a lawsuit that we were involved in, and we were meeting with one of the potential witnesses. And I was surprised, maybe even a little bit shocked at how much information he shared with this one individual. And it was a lot of information that the individual did not need to know, in order to, go through the deposition. But what I learned was he was just reeling them in from a trust perspective. He was sharing information such that he could build that trusting relationship, because for the attorney, the important thing was to get as much accurate information as he could prior to the deposition so he could appropriately defend us. So I think my learning from a transparency perspective it's been a journey in terms of really probably over communicating maybe sometimes, but again, I think that makes people feel that they're valued and that they're part of your team because you've entrusted them with that information. And I just really don't see, rarely see a breach of that trust.
I'm so glad you mentioned trust, because that seems like a really foundational component to workplace relationships. Can you talk a little bit more about trust and about how you build that and what you do if trust doesn't exist in the workplace?
Well, trust is probably one of the most important attributes of a team. And a lot of times, what you see with teams is there's a sort of an artificial approach. And so everybody is acting like everything's okay, but everything is not okay. For example, when you have one member of the team that is deviating from what you think are the team values and things that you should be doing, that can inevitably lead to problems, because there's clearly an issue of trust with that one individual. And then you're going to, the team is going to start to experience frustration if they feel like, why is that behavior being tolerated? Why is that behavior okay? And so I think the trust part is making sure that that you're putting on you're really addressing issues. I think that's just extremely important. And if you're not addressing them, why not? Because inevitably those issues are going to present problems, issues in terms of problem solving. So that to me is probably, again, that's also a key attribute of a team is building that trusting relationship.
So when we think about, being better leaders in our organization, trust is a critical example of that. But in order for us to grow in our leadership style and the way we interact with others, that requires, you mentioned, self-awareness, and I'm going to piggyback off of that and say feedback. So how have you operationalized, but not only giving feedback, but also receiving that feedback to be better?
That's really a great question, and it's actually one that I think most leaders are challenged with throughout their career. I think that feedback, whether it's positive or negative, needs to be just part of your normal conversations. So often our tendency is to let things build, and then unload at the time of the annual performance evaluation, or when you've had it, you've decided that you're going to issue your first verbal warning or your written warning or whatever it is that you're going to do. So there's sort of this level of shock sometimes about what's going on and whether things were really as bad as they now appear to be. And then even worse is when you don't normalize recognizing people for a good job. I mean, that creates discouragement when people don't know where you stand in terms of their value to your team. So it's a lot, but on the negative side, it is a lot less painful. And trust me, I've done it both ways through the years. And I've learned to just incorporate these into my normal discussions. And so my team, what they know from me is if I'm having my weekly meeting, I may say, hey, I got a call from, Dr. Smith, and, what's going on there? You got to do is introduce the idea. They know there was an issue. And that way it kind of takes that big deal away. You can start using that as a teachable moment, which I think is important. And, one of the things that I work with my team on, and this is very important to me, is I really like for them to come tell me when there's been a situation of conflict, and they're very comfortable. They feel safe in that space. Because I actually learned that from one of my prior bosses. If there was a problem, he just wanted to know that there was a problem, and then what are you going to do to fix the problem? And so that's how I have approached my team through the years, and I think that that's a style that just works best for me and my direct reports.
So that's fantastic. You mentioned conflict. Is conflict something that you've had to mediate a lot in the workplace? And if so, how do you approach it, especially when the conflict has maybe emotions running high?
Right. Well, yes, in a fast-paced organization, you're always going to have situations of conflict. That's inevitable. But what I try to do is keep conflict out of the right, wrong, foot in the sand, crossing the line kinds of mindset. And really what I try to do when I'm approaching conflict is to say, can we talk about what we're trying to solve? So I want to put it more in the we category, or, what concerns would you have if we took a different approach? So I think it's really just trying to take the fact that there's going to be a winner or a loser. No, that's really not what you want. You want the conflict you want to have how you approach that conflict that to make sure that you have the best end product that you can have. If you focus on the fact that there's conflict, more likely than not, it's just going to lead to tensions. In one problem in conflict that I see is that our tendency to let tensions lag and lie and go on untapped, for longer periods of time. And all that does is interject into the problem, your perceptions of what that person is thinking about you, and vice versa, what they may be thinking, about me. And so I think, again, it's a timely issue, as we discussed previously. It's really more about timely resolving the conflict so that you can move on to something else.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes when we're on the receiving end of, quote unquote feedback, it may feel anything but constructive to us at that time. So how have you managed that, and how do you prevent it?
Well, what I try to do is what I ask my team to do is never hit that send button when you're angry or when you're frustrated about a situation. I try to follow the very advice that I give my own team, because a lot of times what we draft up, it's amazing to me what people will write in emails that they might not otherwise would say if they were talking with the individual. So my idea is, go ahead and draft up, an email, send it to yourself, and come back and read it later and see if you can take the anger out of the conversation. And so if you've received a communication that is really frustrating you or making you angry, I think the way to address that is to basically say, it's a qualifier. You would say, this is clearly disappointing. I believe there are three issues that need to be addressed. So you've acknowledged that you're frustrated, or but you've used a word that's a little more professional. I'm disappointed. But what you do is you move on to you want to defend your position. So you want to set out the reasons why you still think something needs to be done in a certain way. And I just choose not to make the anger, the main topic. I choose to acknowledge that I'm angry or frustrated, but what I really want is an end result. And so that's where I move to.
So when emotions are rising high, do you advocate stepping away for people to take a step back, or what do you do when it's clear that either you or someone else in the room is feeling very emotionally activated?
I think it's okay to say, I think we're probably at an impasse right now. Why don't we take a break and let me reschedule the meeting for a later time? And then a lot of times what I like to do is kind of send a clarifying email to say, hey, appreciate meeting with you today. Sorry we didn't get to resolve our our situation. I'm going to have, my assistant set up a follow-up meeting, and I look forward to successful resolution, whatever that's going to be. So just, again, trying to take the emotion out of the conversation and get back on track. A lot of times when people walk away from issues, and we all do this, maybe I thought I had to have 5 things, but maybe it's really 2 or 3 things that are really important to me. So how can I maybe reprioritize my expectations so that we can come to a win-win solution?
I like a lot of the stuff what you're saying, and the theme that keeps coming to my mind as you're talking is that I think your attitude, your philosophy is very much around maintaining the relationship, right? Like, you don't want to create that line in the sand. You don't want to write people off, but it's about staying in relationship and what I would call staying in dialogue, maintaining the lines of communication. So I think that's fantastic. And as you know, we do a lot of stuff. We do a lot of dialoguing around DISC too. The personality kind of workplace style assessment, right? Like, have you seen that come into play in terms of the way people approach conversations and relationships, conflict, and so forth?
Yes, and I'm a big fan of DISC. I've actually seen DISC profiles validated by communication or conflict over and over and over. That's why I think it's important to share DISC profiles. I actually have my DISC binder. I laugh and say I collect DISC profiles about like, high school kids collect, keychains for their backpacks. But remember, in the DISC profile, there's no, I think sometimes people are afraid to take the DISC because they think that it's going to be a poor reflection on them, but it's really not. It's really, the DISC profile is just to help us understand who we are and hopefully help others who know our DISC to understand how we want to be approached, how we think when we solve problems. And so I do, whenever most of the time you're not having critical or crucial conversations. I mean, most of the things we do, are just daily routine things that don't really require a reflection of the DISC profile. But on occasion, when you're going to be having a significant conversation or when something's really important to you, as part of your due diligence, I think it's okay to, if you have that DISC profile of the other individual or other members of the team, pull them out and read about and think about, how does that DISC profile affect how I might approach a problem? And I'll tell you, try it, test it, because I think you will be pleasantly pleased with. There's nothing I love more than when somebody comes back and they'll say, they did exactly what you said they were going to do, or they said exactly what you said they would say. Well, that's just part of the preparation, is understanding how that DISC profile may play a role in the actual outcome of something that you're working on.
It's really funny. That's something that we deal with on a nearly perpetual basis, because Matt and I actually have completely inverted DISC profiles. They're like 2 pieces of a puzzle. So that's something that we're front and center with DISC every minute of every day that we're working together, because we're bringing very different strengths to the table. But yeah, you're right. That absolutely makes a lot of difference in how we interact with each other.
Laura, the only thing I would comment, that's a great observation. And, I would just say that, DISC profiles are just an important part of leadership, and kind of remembering, I think it's good to have a diverse team. So it's interesting to plot out teams that are similar in DISC, and how that team may perform as opposed to a team that has much more diverse DISC profiles. So I tend to lean towards having more diverse DISC profiles with my team to the extent possible.
So you mentioned, Patricia, like you're using DISC information to essentially prepare yourself, tee yourself up for a conversation. So walk us through how that might look in negotiation, and what does negotiation even mean in our context?
Well, we negotiate every day. We negotiate with ourselves on what kind of breakfast we're going to enjoy. We negotiate with our friends, our family. Clearly this conversation is about, negotiations in our professional lives. And to me, negotiating skills are a key attribute for any leader. If you're a great leader and a great negotiator, you're always going to try to find the best solution rather than, my solution or my perception of a solution. Okay. So you've got to be, as a great negotiator, you've got to have, those research skills. That's why that disc could play a role. You've got to have good listening skills. You've got to learn to be objective. You've got to be able to prioritize your wish list, the things that you want. These are skills, generally negotiating skills can be developed. It does require that you have self-awareness about where you are in that journey, but negotiating skills is something you can study and you can improve on. I think the most important part of the negotiation, though, if you think about it, there's very few things that are the biggest deal ever, in our business. Most things are much lower in tier in terms of priority. So the key, I think, for negotiating is remembering that you're going to have a long-term relationship with that person that you're working with. So when you walk away from that negotiation, you're going to see them in the hall. You're going to see them in the clinic. You're going to see them in the OR. Or whatever environment is the environment that you're generally in. And so, again, you want to have mutual respect for that individual. And hopefully between the two of you in that negotiating process, you come up with the best solution, for the particular issue that you're trying to address, and that you're both able to collectively communicate out jointly the decisions that have been made.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious. I'm sure you've got a lot of experience with this. Do you have any stories of negotiations that either went very, very well or very, very poorly, and what we could learn from that?
Yeah, we had, I've got lots of stories. I probably need to write a book on all these stories, but, some of the funnier ones, I was negotiating with a lawyer one time for a contract. So the contract was going to be between UAB, the UAB medicine, our system, and another hospital system. And it was not a complicated deal from my point of view, but my attorney colleague on the other side was just making just ridiculous demands. And I had even made a joke internally back at UAB. I'd said, gosh, I think this guy must have taken some kind of professional, negotiating class. But one day, it really was the straw that broke the camel's back. I had done all I could do, but there were certain things that some of the things he was wanting were just really, they were ridiculous in my mind. And so I basically said, I said, I'm done. I said, I'm going to go back and communicate to my client that we're unable to achieve a deal because I'm not going to agree to a provision that this lawyer wanted in the contract. And I said, great to talk to you. And I just hung up. I just disconnected. And it wasn't 5 minutes later, he called and he said, I'm sorry, you're right. I was just trying to get the best deal for my client. Well, fast forward to the day that we were going to have a signing breakfast. Way back then, you didn't have all the digital technology that we had. So we were going to have a signing breakfast. And I just happened to be looking at the contracts before that signing, and he had not removed the provision that we had agreed to. And I just said very quietly, I'm about to advise my client, we're not going to sign this deal. And if you don't go back and make that change now. So that was just a very difficult negotiation from the very beginning. And I just had to try to, maintain my composure, but so in my mind, I'm sitting here a lot of times listening to this guy thinking this is so ridiculous. But, I did not, again, want to let that emotion and behaviors play a role in how I was trying to approach getting this contract negotiated, although it was challenging. So that's just an example of, and with many, many positive examples at UAB, very positive. I mean, the health system was formed based on major negotiations with the boards, various boards, and the evolution of the health system has, again, been as a byproduct of negotiations between our leadership and our boards, recognizing that there's an end game in terms of making the organization successful.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference for you, like between those successful negotiations and the ones that were difficult or unsuccessful? Were there pivotal things that made the difference, things that you did that helped impact the outcome positively? What advice would you give for someone in a similar situation?
I guess, sometimes you can't pick your partners on the other side. You, so you don't know how a negotiation is going to go. And a lot of times that will make, my leaders very anxious when they don't perceive that a negotiation is going to have an outcome that they feel comfortable with. And what I've told them before is to be patient. Primarily for large negotiations, my experience is that these things have a way of playing out to a successful conclusion. Nobody's motivated to have a bad deal, a deal that all the sides don't want. And so a lot of times it's really just having some element of patience as you work through the various issues. Things that were very important at the beginning of a negotiation may be of no importance at the end of the negotiation. So again, remembering that we're going to be meeting these people, we're going to be going into these boardrooms and other things should keep us motivated towards getting to the right solution, but understanding sometimes that takes time.
All good stuff, Patricia. This is so fabulous. I guess I'm just backtracking here just slightly. You're really big on developing the relationship and, win-win, but regardless of how proactive we are, we might find ourselves in a situation where those emotions are high. We're in real time. How do you handle that situation? Like, is there a strategy that you deploy not only to self-manage yourself, but also to diffuse the situation?
Well, one of my, sometimes maybe just doing something lighthearted, I might say, well, I can sense your passion, on this topic, and maybe just some little qualifier to take things down. You got to remember though, when somebody's angry, the last thing you want to do is make them not feel like they're respected. So I have learned through my development years as a leader to be prepared when I'm going to a meeting where I'm anticipating some level of anger, some level of conflict. And so that I may practice in a mirror, literally at home, in terms of practice, getting myself acclimated to what my position is going to be, getting myself comfortable with what my positions are going to be. It's just as part of that preparation. But most of the time, if you're not reacting to the anger, that in and of itself would diffuse the situation a little bit. So I really think it's about how am I going to conduct myself in these meetings, and how am I going to, again, show respect, which I think is just critical, even when the other person, may be a little bit, off balance in terms of how they're approaching a problem.
Mm-hmm. So when Laura and I teach this topic to some of our, colleagues and so forth, we often recommend starting with empathy. Like if those emotions are high, reverse it, start with empathy, stay in dialogue, create the right dialogue, right? So have some of those dialogue starters in your back pocket. And then also create emotional space. If the emotions truly are high, time out, let's take a break, or let's pause and maybe revisit tomorrow, or whatever that strategy might look like. Is that something that you subscribe to?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no requirement with almost no exceptions that an issue be resolved in one meeting. And so I think it's what's the takeaway? What's the homework that you're going to do? And I'll tell you that with rare exception, I always try to thank the individual that I'm working with. Hey, I look forward to the next meeting. Good conversation today. All those things are just saying that, we're in this together. We may not be we may not have the same position. We may not have the same desired outcome, but what the thing that we do want, and I often use this because I'm in healthcare, I'll go, our solution, we're going to put the patient in the middle of this table today. And then we're going to back away and figure out how we're going to solve this problem, because most of our issues are really indirectly, if not directly, affect patient care. So I think by starting with that conversation, it kind of helps to say, this is my priority, regardless of what solution we come up with.
It's a good point, because you're really starting from a place of shared goal, shared meaning. So that's fabulous. Laura, do you have any other comments or questions?
Yes, I'm just curious. This has been such a wealth of wonderful information, and I'm sure everyone will benefit from hearing it. I'm curious if somebody was just beginning to assume a leadership role and they were needing to manage relationships with others from that role for the first time. What's the best advice either you heard or that you've developed yourself over the years?
So I mentor a sizable number of young professionals at UAB now, and I advise them like I advise myself, talking about that personal advisory board. You know, what I try to do is write down how, you know, what I want to say or what I'm thinking, and get some reaction from colleagues who, you know, are on equal footing, if you will, and with me in terms of skill sets. And I like to help coach, do coaching in conflict resolution. And that's a very important part of the conversations that I have when I'm mentoring a young professional, because that's the area that we all struggle with the most. But if we can get on top of it early in our careers, it really is a game changer. And if you don't get on top of it early in your career, it's something that's going to distract you for all of your profession, because there's just nothing worse than knowing I don't deal with conflict. I don't like to deal with conflict. I'm not dealing with conflict. You know, that's a weakness in leadership. So beginning that, giving them that space to practice, if you will, how they might approach conflict is so important. And I have to do the same when it's a situation that's extremely important to me.
Excellent. All right. Well, any other final thoughts or questions from Laura or Patricia?
That was just fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, I thank y'all. I mean, those are great questions. And, you know, these are lessons learned in life with shared learnings. The more that we can share, you know, our learnings with our colleagues, I think it in the end, it makes our organization healthier and stronger. So thank you.
We're super grateful to have you on our radio show today, Patricia. And we did record this so that we could share the wealth. So thank you again for coming.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.